I do not. There
Okay,
you go.
I've got it. I've got it. All right, thank you. Thank you. There we go. All
Perfect.
right. And
Okay.
this is what happened. Okay, once again, Melissa Josefiak. I'm the director of Essex Historical Society, and we'd like to welcome you to EHS's lecture series marking the 40th anniversary of the Falls River flood of 1982. Rescue, recovery, remembrance. Check that you're so we don't have any ambient noise. And we have 3 speakers lined up for today. We will have time for a few questions later on. I know a lot of you through the flood and that you have many stories to share. Those stories can be shared when we come together in person on April 10th. So it takes a village or 2 or 3 to put together a program like this. And I'd like to thank our presenting partners, Ivoryton Library and Essex Land Trust. I'd also like to thank the planning team of Ivoryton Library's head librarian, Elizabeth Howard, and EHS board member, Stacia Libby, as well as Doug Sen from the Essex Volunteer Fire Department. I know Doug just lost his dad, John Sen, who was an integral member of the fire department of the flood. And in fact, when we were connecting with our speakers, everyone mentioned John Sen. So we wish he could be a part of this talk today. We'd also like to thank EHS collection team volunteers for their work on today's slideshow. The show holds over 100 photographs scanned by Elizabeth Toll, Danny Hansen. Dan also provided research support for the opening talk, and many of today's photos identified by longtime Ivoryton resident and EHS volunteer, Winnie Olson. I'd also like to thank our important Follow the Falls team. Follow the Falls is a long-term collaboration between the Historical Society and Essex Land Trust as we trace the historical and environmental significance of the Falls River. We've talked about Falls River Cove in 2018, we've talked about Centerbrook in 2020, and we're getting ready now. We're in the research phase and the writing phase of our Ivoryton story, which we hope to have out in 2023. Now this lecture series continues. Today is the first program on Rescue Night. On Sunday, March 27th at 3 p.m. via Zoom, we'll discuss the recovery aspect. What happens after the rain dries and what's left here in Ivoryton and Centerbrook. April 10th, in-person event at Trinity Lutheran Church in Centerbrook entitled Remembrance, when members of the public can share their heartily thank Trinity Lutheran live streaming that event. I know there were a number of events in previous years, and the great regret was we never recorded it. So we have the opportunity for today's session, for the 20th and for the 10th to be recorded. And we'd like to have you mark your calendars for the week of June 4th and 5th as Essex Land Trust hosts a Falls River flood hike at the Mill Race Preserve in Ivoryton. Now there are a number of area historical societies who will be presenting flood related events this year. Please look at your calendars to see what's going on. I'm just going to gently remind everyone, I hear some ambient noise, please mute yourself upon coming in. And so I'm just going to let our partners know they're slightly a little bit about current events. We all know men who do not study history are condemned to repeat it. I like to think about this in a different way, to say that if men could learn from history what lessons it might teach us. And I remember that was a quote from Herman Melville. Now, I'm talking to you as the EHS director, but I'd also like to talk to you as a 4th of 5 generation Ukrainian Americans who have lived and worked, prayed in the state of 125. As we think about our flood program this afternoon, incredible stories of bravery and resilience. Obviously, you're all aware of the invasion of Ukraine that's going on right now, and we have the opportunity to act locally and think globally. So if there's any way that you can possibly help through humanitarian aid, through collections, potential donations, or even writing to your Congress people, this is the opportunity for all of us as Americans to take action because as we look at the Falls River flood of 1982 and how neighbor is helping neighbor, it's a testament to what happens when everybody pulls together. So I like to think that local history matters, and of course, and it can affect global events. So on that, we've got people still coming in. Just a reminder to keep yourself muted. Let's start with a little bit of context. When we think of Falls River flood, many people on this call lived through it. People or live in Essex. I'd like to present a few slides before we talk to our speakers so we all know that we're on the same page. So the first slide I'd like to start with is a modern image of town of Essex. We can see that Ivoryton is in light brown, Meadowbrook green, and then the village of Essex itself is in purple. The Falls River is the river that ties it all together. When we think of Essex, it's 3 villages, 2 rivers, and 1 shared history. So that Falls River is the one that starts out here in Westbrook, actually in Deep River, Wright's Pond, and flows through Ivoryton, connecting the 3 villages through Centerbrook and emptying out through Falls River Cove. Think of the various ponds and dams that were in this area. The Falls River can be harnessed for power. And what's important to know is that this is Comstock Pond off of Main Street in Ivoryton. And this little rivulet here connects to the much larger Bushy Hill Lake reservoir. It's not necessarily on this map, but that will tie into our story today. Historically speaking, there were once 7 dams located on the Falls River. When we have those European settlers moving to this area, water power was a perfect furnace. Those mills, corn, sawmill, fulling mills, all sorts of small manufacturing. By the 1840s, they'd been experimenting with a number of ivory locations down and other places in lower Middlesex, but with Comstock, Falls River, and dams, which is the Bull Dam upon the Copper Beach Inn, number 6, which is out by what we call the low mower instrument, and then Comstock Dam farther up on Main Street, which is a much smaller pond. Now, we don't need water power by the end of the 19th century. We've moved over to combustion engines. And so those dams that were on the Falls River are no longer really functional. They fall into slight disrepair. And we think about century, not very useful. When you look at early photo, this is about mid 20th century, you can see the Falls River coming in, collecting at the former Lily Pond here. This is Main Street. Before pond, per shop. Comstock Cheney, Ivory, later known by 1936 as Pratt Reed. When we move to the next image, we think about what happened the weekend of June 4th, 5th, and 6th, 1982. So we've set the scene with dams that are not necessarily tip-top shape. Preliminary report is 1980 out the condemn of those dams. The repair deadline was actually by the time you get to 82. From various 7 to 12 inches in a 2 that we can stretch that 18 inches of rain. Think about the pressure that was put on those dams, on those waterways at that time. Now at 12:30, let's say the evening between the 5th and the 6th, that upper dam at the Bushy Hill Reservoir actually broke. It had been monitored by a number of, and we knew that it was going to fail. And so first responders went into evacuation mode, and many people were evacuated, moved to high ground, and the flood broke. 12:30, millions of gallons of water hurtling down the the Falls River. In doing so, as it comes around the Pratt Reed factory, it picks up 500,000 feet of lumber that we're drying. That and debris go down the Falls River, and it gets stuck in slow underpasses, gates, artificial dams. Water will always find and it pushes around those artificial dams, creates new pathways, cutting in places water should be. Estimated that the damage of that whole weekend in Middlesex County was about $277 million in 1982 dollars. It left 12 people either missing or dead, but miraculously, none of them were in Essex. And that is a testament to the bravery, creativity, and resilience of our responders. And today, 3 of them will share their experiences that night. We have Bob Natras, who was a resident state trooper, who was an Essex constable, and Paul, who was with Essex Volunteer Fire Department. So what I'd like to do, scrolling, and we, Bob, and here's the image of the clock as it was shattered at Pratt Reed, and then the old Comstock Pond before, and then after the flood. It's the same view. We scroll the slides, and we're going to start with Bob, and I'll give you about 10, 12, 15 to talk about your experiences as a state trooper that weekend of the flood. Please unmute yourself, and I'm happy to ask you questions too, leading up to that. Muted?
Can you hear me now?
Unmute yourself. Oh, perfect. There you go. Okay. So what are your first impressions at night leading up to the flood?
I was actually at home. I had the distinction of being the first resident state trooper that did not live in Essex. And I received a call from Troop F that afternoon saying we were going to be getting flooding. We were getting a quote, a big storm, and they expected flooding on the shoreline, and that they had activated all the resident troopers who had waterfront towns. So I reported to the office, and the rain was raining, and we had no forewarning at all as to the issue with the dams or what have you. The first thing we noticed was that the water was getting high on the bridges between the villages. So I made a decision to call in constables, the constables that lived in town and lived in the 3 villages. I assigned 1 constable to each village in case we had a problem with the bridges. And that was probably the best decision I ever made, because we wound up not able to get into Ivoryton at all. Ron Krajewski, who is not on the call here today, but Ron was the constable in Ivoryton, and the first thing,
still showing my mom on time.
pardon me? Ron was the Ivoryton constable, and he was the one that kind of let us know that the dam failed. We had flooding in over the bridges. We could not get into Ivoryton at all. It was reported that there was actually someone standing. I found this out the day after the initial flood, that there was somebody standing near the dam and survived, got washed to the side when the dam let go, which is a miracle that he lived through that. the immediate response that I had to an emergency was in the area we used to refer to as the cut, which is the area that goes through from Deep River into Centerbrook. And we had severe flooding in a backyard. The fire department contacted the barracks and said that there were cars being washed off the bridge and there were people in the water. That was the most dramatic rescue that I was involved in, and it turned out to be the fire department, Bill Morgan and Bob Natras. We had a car, and we actually had an individual in a tree in the car, and we had no way to get out there to get him. The hydraulics from the flooding was tremendous. You couldn't possibly swim. We wound up commandeering I saw a boat trailer come through up on Main Street in Centerbrook, and we raced up there and grabbed the boat actually and brought it down. We were trying to figure out how we could get a rescue into the water. The fire department was there. We were in a backyard, and we spotted a fellow holding actually in a tree, and the water was moving so fast that there was no way we could get to him. And it was pure improvisation that we had no tools. It's not like the rescue situation we have today where fire departments have tow boats and water skis and all that stuff. So one of my constables by the name of George Emanuel at the time owned a sporting goods store in Centerbrook. And George was on vacation, so the store was locked up. We couldn't get in touch with him. So Constable Morgan and I burglarized the store to get in to try to get some rope. And so now we had a boat and rope. And with the help of the fire department, we launched the boat out of a backyard. Bill and I shimmied down a clothesline with the boat out to the tree towards the fellow that was captured caught in the tree. I should back up a little bit and say while we were gathering how we were going to conduct the rescue deal, I made a call into the barracks because at one time the state police had a helicopter, and I was informed that we no longer had a helicopter available, but they could call the Coast Guard. When they got back to me, the closest Coast Guard helicopter was on Long Island, and they were talking about at least an hour and a half to get to us. And our gentleman in the tree was not going to be able to hang on for an hour and a half. So we wound up launching the boat, climbed out along the clothesline, and we got as close as we could. And that's when the heroics really started. Bill Morgan put on a life jacket, tied a rope around his waist, and swam out to the tree and carried the gentleman back to the boat. And the fire department towed us in by rope onto shore. It's a miracle. And I'll let Bill give you some of the details of some of the stuff that was going on when he speaks. But we literally had 100-gallon propane tanks floating in the river. We had cars floating in the river. And at one point, we actually had a house come down on us. So it's a miracle. We got the fellow out. To this day, I don't know his name. never had the opportunity to take any photos or even get his name. We were just too busy that night to document. The next rescue I was involved in was on the overpass. I got a call that we had a bunch of cars on Route 9 abandoned, and one of the cars had someone on the roof of the car, but we could not get down to Route 9. The barracks couldn't get a trooper down Route 9 because Route 9 was flooded out, and the roadway was actually being eroded by the Falls River going through there. That rescue was done with the fire department, and they literally we dropped ropes off the bridge. And the thing I remember most that stands out in my mind is we were all concerned that we'd be able to haul this guy straight up off the roof of his car onto an overpass. Did we have the strength to do it? We didn't have any winches or anything of that sort. And the fellow I remember the most was the cook from the Copper Beach Inn, who was in his white regalia from cooking. Was a big guy. I don't know his name. I don't remember anything other than he was a giant. He tied the rope around his waist and was basically our anchor guy while we hauled this guy off the roof of his car up onto the overpass and got him to safety. Those are the two rescues that I was personally involved in. I heard about a lot of other heroics that went down that night. But the thing that I recall the most was the improvisation. You know, we didn't have equipment to do what we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have walkie-talkies back in those days. And it was just a cooperative effort between all the players, the fire department. Mutual aid was kind of a thing of the past, but mutual aid at that point, Essex was not the only town in trouble. The whole Troop F area, Westbrook, Deep River, Haddam areas were all suffering from the same problem. So we were kind of on our own, and the people of Essex were the people that actually saved themselves. Initially, the fire department, the volunteers, the ambulance people. I actually spent 4 days. I never got home for 4 days. The only thing that got Bill and I off duty, believe it or not, was he and I were graduating from the University of New Haven, and we got permission to leave after 4 days to graduate from school. So I can tell you about the National Guard was called in. This was after the fact, but from the rescue point of view, those are my war stories anyway. And I'm sure Bill can fill in more details. Rescue wise, I'd say that's about it. It was an unbelievable week. There were a lot of real heroes. A lot of the people that were involved are not here anymore. Dick Riggio was the first selectman. Dick was a World War II tank commander and a war hero. Contractor in town. His family, he was the first selectman at the time. Dick would always come around whenever we had a storm or whatever and ride with me around town. He wanted to check outs for the highway department, et cetera. The ladies that worked in the town hall wound up working overtime. The National Guard came in, the state police brass came in. Essex was fortunate. The governor was there. It came to town several times. We were fortunate to have Dick Schneller, who was a state senator and Governor O'Neill's point man during his campaign and everything. And so we had a lot of help at the Capitol, direct help from the Capitol. And I want to mention one thing in case I'm not around for future meetings. One of the greatest aids we had in town later on was, and a lot of people were not aware of it, but I was approached by 2 school buses pulled into the Ambulance Association. I think it was on the 2nd or 3rd day. And they were Mennonites, and they had come in and wanted to register. They had ID cards. They had 2 busloads of supplies, and the Mennonites, it was a rescue operation that they ran. They came out of Pennsylvania, and their members actually went door to door to a lot of the houses and cleaned up. So I just wanted to give them they were the most helpful. From a personal standpoint, I can say I was totally disappointed in FEMA. The feds came in later on, and they talked about putting trailers in the area of the Essex Railroad and all kinds of things. And I found that the real heroes were the local people, the Ambulance Association, the fire department, the staff at the selectman's office, and the Connecticut National Guard came in. They gave us water buffaloes because all the wells were contaminated with septic, and we didn't have a water supply. So the National Guard gave us water buffaloes with fresh water. Those are the things.
Bob, it's Melissa. I'm just going to jump in, and I'm going to say thanks, because we're just going to move on to the next person, if we could, please. These are students or stories. Next, I'd like to Bill Morgan, who was an Essex constable. You've mentioned him a few times, and I know that the 2 of you, all 3 of you, work so well together. So I'm going to invite Bill Morgan to speak, please.
Good
Thanks,
afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me part of this event. I'm excited because there's a lot of history that I really think needs to be captured in the moment. And I have my take on it. You have to understand, I was a 22-year-old college student who started as a part-time police officer in Essex in 1980. And my parents, my dad was the advertising director for Soundings Boating Publications down in the Dauntless Shipyard. So I've been fortunate to be in the area, but I still didn't live in town. And what Bob was started to talk about, and some of the things that we did on Saturday, I was assigned actually to work the boat patrol as a Marine officer. So the Marine uniform was different than the other police uniforms at the time. It was basically khaki pants and a khaki jacket and, a baseball cap that said Essex Police on it. And I was, in a rainy day. So we were in the patrol car driving around because we didn't need to be in the boat on the river. When we got the first concerns, Trooper Natras called me from the state police barracks on the radio and said, go to the Copper Beach Inn. And it was probably 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. He said, go to the Copper Beach Inn and tell them they're closed because we're concerned that the flooding is going to cause the Copper Beach Inn to have a whole bunch of casualties or stranded people that aren't going to get out of town. We hadn't lost the bridges at that point, but the water was rising. And as everyone's kind of heard, the passage was getting tenuous and treacherous. And so I remember walking into the Copper Beach Inn probably soaked like a rat as some young kid in a khaki uniform and a baseball cap. And I said, I need to talk to the manager. We have to evacuate you. There's some concerns about public safety and the dam might break. And the manager didn't want to believe me. And so I said, well, let's call the state police barracks where Trooper Naturals was still at that time. And, you can speak to him. So he called him. And then I called and said, hey, Bob, he doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't believe me. And so Bob got on the phone and I can remember him saying, look, I'm telling you right now, you're closed. The health department, any authorization you need, you're now closed. And then he said, hand the phone back to Morgan. So he handed the phone back to me and he said, Billy, you give him 5 minutes. If he doesn't exit, put him in handcuffs and then you close the restaurant because you're in charge of it. And I'm like, okay. But, as a young police officer, that level of authority being pushed out to you immediately to say, here, this is probably one of the most prestigious restaurants in Connecticut at the time in 1982, and certainly wasn't inexpensive. And now we're shutting it down. And when the people did leave, Bob referenced the chef coming out and coming into Centerbrook later that night. And the good news is we got all those people that were in their restaurant out safely because, as the community in the area, it's not 250, 300 yards from where some of these rivers and streams were, where the Copper Beach Inn sat. Fortunately, the river stream of the river kind of put it on the other side of the road, and that helped save the Copper Beach from getting destroyed by the lumber and the wood. So my initial thing, that was the start of when I realized we're going to have some issues. Then when Bob decided to divide everybody up, he said, Morgan, you're with me, and we're going to stay in the center of town. And so we were there, and it's kind of surreal because it's pouring rain. I mean, it's just buckets of rain coming down. And we are getting these reports that the dam is in trouble and they may collapse, and we're kind of waiting. And then the first call came in about the guy who'd gotten washed away in his car. And as that happened, then Ron Krajewski on the radio said they're reporting the dam just broke. And that was the Messerschmitt Dam. And that dam then dumped into the Copper Beach, the one by Pratt Reed. And as that dam went, we knew there was literally houses were going by. And so we went to do this first rescue. And I, again, being a young man, my parents had given me a bulletproof vest. And so I took off my vest, I took off my gun belt, we're putting everything in the car, we're looking for this boat. And all of a sudden you hear gunshots. Now, part of the problem was people were in their homes stuck and now they wanted to be rescued. And so they were letting people know that they were in their house. And I'm like, 22-year-old kid going, my parents get me this bulletproof vest and I take it off and now they start shooting at me in this town? Holy mackerel. And we ended up really building a great team of people. The fire department, once we got some rope from George's, the fire department officers that were in the Centerbrook area, and now we started to see what Bob described as those 3 islands. We couldn't ask the officers in the fire department that were down, in Essex Center area, down by the church, to come to help us because they were on one side of the water. And the people who were in Ivoryton were in Ivoryton. We were in the middle, and the way we couldn't even get help from Deep River because, as Bob described, that the old 154 had now flooded. And, so whatever 12, 14, 20 people there were there, we were that. That was it. There wasn't anybody coming. So we managed to get this boat. We managed to get out, and Bob was trying to use the motor to get the boat to stay straight. The water was traveling so fast. Every type of debris in it you could imagine. Literally houses, cars. And the guy that was in the tree, Bob, was very generous in the sense that his clothes had actually been ripped off him except his underwear. And so he wasn't going to survive just from the sheer temperature of the water, the speed of the water. It was probably 40, 50 mile an hour at some time because of the volume of water coming down on him. And so we got the boat. Finally, later I figured out we launched it from a roof of a building's garage. Later, I'd go back and look for where did we launch this boat from. So we went up river probably 300, 400 yards, pushed the boat out far enough, used the motor to get the boat into the kind of the right alignment. The first time we didn't get it right. We had to pull the boat back in with the motor and the line with the fire department. And the second time we got it in place. And the guy was stuck in the tree and he was scared beyond compare. I'm sure everyone can imagine what it must feel like to think you're going to die in the moment. And literally with lumber and pieces of board coming by him, we didn't have extra jackets, life jackets. So, I jumped in the water, put the life jacket on him, and then got him back to the boat with me being tied. And I figured, he's going to get to the boat, and if something happens, I'm tied to the boat. I'm not going to worry. I'll figure out how to get back. But again, the fire department then pulls us in. The ambulance people that were present start helping him because they're concerned about hypothermia. And literally moments go by, and then Bob and I are going to that other description of the rocks and pulling these guys up from the bridge on Route 9. And so the cars on Route 9, later we would figure out there was something like 3 or 4 million gallons of water that crossed Route 9. And cars, the road gets destroyed. So we had all that going on. Now add to that, the power's out. You've lost power. There's no lighting. So now it's 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't see because there's no lighting other than what you bring with you, your flashlights, your car lights. And we're trying to figure out what really is going on around us. Where else do you hear people calling for help? Where else can you get help to? And so probably the next 2 hours was more of just, okay, the water's done. The people that were in the immediate crisis were taken care of. And then we became like owls. We were looking for the problem. What are you going to find? Where are we going to find the next problem? And then the following morning, I think, I got to the ambulance barn and changed my clothes only because everything was still wet. And Sam O'Donnell was there at the ambulance barn. She said, take my son's clothes, Tommy, and here, get it wrapped up in this blanket. Your clothes will be dry in a couple of, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. They washed them and dried them. And I took a nap. And then it's 6 o'clock in the morning and the sun's coming up. And so it was like, okay, we're going back out. And at that point, a vast majority of the water had already started to recede. And we realized that we needed to talk to the community. And the good news is Charlie O'Donnell, as the emergency management director, had the ability to utilize the nuclear power speakers that were in the community. And so they figured out what the message was they wanted the people in the community to hear. And so then Charlie went on the PA system from the nuclear power notification systems and started telling people, things are under control. Yes, we don't have power, but we're going to get back people as soon as we can get there. Our law enforcement and people are coming, so stay safe and be safe. And one of the things that was concerned the Trooper Natras was the number of senior citizens we had in the rest area in the condominium development just beyond the Methodist Church. So he gave me the assignment that morning. I had to go in and knock on every door and write down every person's name because they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have a way to get information. so that when people were worried about their senior citizen in-laws or the people that lived in that area, they were on the high side of the river, so the water didn't necessarily get into their homes as much, but the concern about, are they safe? Did they make it home? Were they stuck in one of the other problems that we didn't know about yet? And so we started to try to figure out how to take kind of inventory of that one area that we knew was very vulnerable because of the high water. Well, again, I had been in my police uniform and I didn't have boots. So again, George Emmanuel's building, thank God, I got some fishing boots and we went up there, and to walk even in the roadway in certain areas, there was like 1.5 feet or 2 feet of silt. And so every lift of your foot was stuck in the mud. And as you went up, it was like a slog just to traverse, 100 yards to get to where I could get in the entranceway. And so the real concern then started to become, what are we doing for the safety of the community? And again, the coordination with the fire department and the ambulance service was essential, because we were all suffering from the same thing, which was access. We couldn't get to certain parts of the town still. I mean, I think it was 2 or 3 days that it took to get, through Centerbrook by going up and around, into Deep River and, coming down to exit 3 and not being in an area that was heavily flooded, because River Road and all these other side cut throughs that people are familiar with today were flooded, and they had water, standing water on them still. And the DOT wanted to make sure the roads weren't going to be undermined and they needed to be safe. So we had a lot of transportation related issues. And you heard Bob mention about the first selectman Riggio going out with him in the car and kind of just taking a real analysis of what else might get needed to be fixed. And the one of the things that stands out in my mind is, during a lot of tragedies, you frequently hear that there's this term called gallows humor. Law enforcement, firefighters, we experience it, ambulance, EMTs, my wife's a nurse, everyone kind of use it. Well, Bob Natras and I were both graduating from the University of New Haven on Sunday the 6th. Well, that didn't happen. They canceled because of the bad weather. But understand, Bob had 10 years of time working towards his degree, and I only had 4. So for me, I saw it as important, but, it's okay. But Bob had 10 years to get his education done, and now we weren't going to be there. And so when he later, it really took us about 4 or 5 days before they accepted the fact that we were going to leave the following Sunday to go to graduation, or Saturday when the university held it. But for those first 4 or 5 days, I think we probably worked 18 hours each day. And so much of it was just trying to piece together what was available and then start to put together the concerns about, we rescued these people. We had done this great job of figuring out who was still in the area in the community. And then we needed to figure out how that next phase that you were talking about in terms of the recovery was going to happen with both the police department, the state police, the National Guard, CLNP, the gas company. All of these vital services had been disrupted tremendously in the community. And so the good news is, during the night, we didn't have fires. I mean, we could have easily had propane tanks, or we could have had problems with the natural gas lines as these houses came off their footings. And again, we were, as a community, as the town of Essex, was certainly blessed not to have any fatalities. And it really was a lesson for me that I've carried with me for my life about the power of Mother Nature and the true need to be thinking about, are you prepared today for what you might need tomorrow? I hope that kind of lays it out there for you. Anything else?
Well, thank you very, very much.
Okay.
At this point, we're going to anything for questions but now I'm going to turn over to Pazzi, who was with the Essex Fire Department at the time of flood. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, this is good. They talked and now I can get out of here in 3 minutes. You know, the fire
I'm
department
going.
started, actually flooding in the area started really bad back in 1978 when we had the blizzard of 78. And not too long after that, there was still about a foot of snow on the ground, and we had some warm weather and a lot of rain, and the whole Ivoryton area got submerged. I mean, Pratt Reed had a couple feet of water in it, and there were no broken dams at that time. So we were kind of aware of where the problem areas were. And, you know, fast forward to 1982, and it started on a Friday night for us. We were getting calls from people because the rain had started and just never relented. As Bill said, it was just raining buckets. And so we were out pumping cellars, making people's houses safe. And then come Saturday, it still keeps going, and multiple calls for service throughout the town. As the day progressed around, middle of the afternoon on that Saturday, it got really serious, and the bridge on Main Street in Ivoryton near the Congregational Church was overtopped, and it was getting hard for traffic to go by. So we had to get out. We had to start to stop people from going in that direction. The water coming around the back of where the Ivoryton store used to be and the library is, that was starting to rise. And it was at that time that Chief Paul Phoenix made the decision he had to split the town. As both Bill and Bob alluded to, that we were going to get isolated, and he wanted some fire and rescue protection in each area. And he assigned myself, a group of other people in the fire department, to take care of everything from the bridge out to Pond Meadow. And then he put past Chief John Sen and Assistant Chief Fred Hall in charge of the group in Centerbrook, and the chief himself and Assistant Chief Bill Buckridge took care of the downtown area down in Essex proper. And we had numerous, as they said, people in trees, and in the beginning, people didn't want to leave their homes, and rightfully so. But as the day continued and it got worse and worse, then people started to cry for and call for help. And as Bob said, there were no cell phones. We were, running on basic equipment back then, not like we have today. And I remember, the National Weather Service said that they put out warnings. Well, there was really no system in place. Okay. And Charlie O'Donnell was one of the best emergency management people any town could ever have. And he never heard about it, and it was just the local people working together that just said, hey, this isn't getting better. We've got to do our thing. And by, I want to say 7, 8 o'clock that night, as darkness fell, Chief Phoenix had talked to Dick Riggio and he put out the word that the people from Pratt Reed were concerned about the Clark's Pond Dam. And so he told me, I want you to get on the other side of the factory and check that dam out. And a group of us went up with one of our fire trucks, and we looked, and I said, Chief, I don't think I can get through here. Okay. He said, well, give it a try. And if you have to, abandon the engine. So, but we made it through. Water was pouring into the cab as we drove through the water. And one of the first things that we ran into, where the little bridge is on the lower side of Clark's Pond, the water couldn't go underneath the bridge anymore. There was so much water coming off the spillway and over the top of the dam that it couldn't empty out fast enough. It was over the road. And I got up there, I met the gentleman from Pratt Reed. We stood on the top of the dam. And literally it had those big granite blocks that made up most of the dam, and there was water squirting out. It had to be squirting out 15, 20 feet. And I relayed that information to the chief, and he said, I want you guys to start to evacuate everybody. Anybody that's in homes along the Falls River, I want them out. We had to take care of the people on West Main Street in here in Ivoryton, and we had to take care of Cheney Street, all the way down through till we got to the bridge. And but we were kind of stuck. My group was kind of stuck on the other side now. And I told Paul, I said, I'm going to go up and check the Bushy Hill Dam just to see what that's doing. And we drove up there, and probably at 9, 10 o'clock, there was probably 3 or 4 feet of headspace on that dam. It really wasn't that bad. And so I reported back to him that, the Bushy Hill Dam looks fine. We should be okay up here, but I'm really worried about the other one. But we had gotten everybody out that we could get. We're tying ourselves off. We're getting to houses. We're getting people out. And we got most of the people in front of, and some of them, we sent them up to the Bushy Hill Nature Center. I believe Dick had talked to somebody up there, and they could use it as an evacuation point, because once you got up, even up that high, as you headed out towards Deep River, as Bill said, those towns had their problems too. We had people head up that way, try and keep them out of harm's way. We then headed down into Palm Meadow because we had heard of the problems with Messerschmitt's Dam and Wright's Pond. And we got to the bridge on Palm Meadow Road, and you couldn't even see it. The water was coming from the Westbrook area so quickly. We started to make our way across that, and the next thing you know, it was a 2,000-gallon fuel oil tank that had been buried in somebody's yard came floating by us and just missed us. And we made it onto the other side, and we got people out that were around the low-lying areas there. And it was getting later at night, and the chief said, you know what, I want everybody just to take up a position. Things were, as Bill said, things started to calm down. There were no power, no anything. Find a safe place and just stay, and I'll stay in contact with you. And it was 12:30 at night, and all of a sudden, the sky lit up. and we thought what we heard was wind. And we're looking around and we said, no, the trees aren't moving. How come that we hear all this noise? And the sky was absolutely green. Well, we didn't realize it from our vantage point, but that's when the Bushy Hill Dam had broke, came down, and in front of Select Woman's Libby's house, there used to be the CLMP substation. Well, when that water got down into there, it took out the substation, and the light show must have been phenomenal because we could see it way up above the trees. And the next thing you know, the water starts to rise. Now, the water was backing up into Palm Meadow towards Westbrook. And we were parked in an area, and I'd say it was raising, at least a foot a minute. And we had to get out of there, go to some higher ground. And we began to realize that we're now really cut off from everybody. We tried to get out the other way. We thought we could go out through Westbrook and come up over Lynn Road. There was no way. The water coming through down by where Elsie Doan is now was just no way we were getting through there. So we had to wait it out. And as Bill said, about 6 o'clock in the morning, the water started to regress. And we said, well, let's see if we can make it. And I actually tied young firefighter Sen off to the front of the truck, and he walked in front, and we made our way across the bridge. And when we got up to West Main Street again, we made it as far as where Clark's Pond used to be. And the site was just surreal. The earth was gone. Everything was down to bedrock. When that water came through there, it just took everything. And we were staring down into the ground 25, 30 feet. And we said, well, we're not getting back to Ivoryton this way. And we finally made it back later that day and made it back into Ivoryton Center. And by that time, the National Guard had arrived. But one thing, just the week following, we were working the week following every day, pumping cellars, helping people, sandbagging stuff. There was so much residual water in the area, but it was really true. There was no power. There was no water. We were disconnected, the three villages. Every night before it got dark, Chief Phoenix would have us meet at the main firehouse, which at that time was on Prospect Street. And we would discuss what we had done during the day, what needed to be done. And then we would go back before it got totally dark. And, you know, the people of this area lived without power for a tremendous amount of time. The bridge, when it broke up here in Ivoryton, damaged the water main coming into the Ivoryton section. So as Billy said, you know, the National Guard brought the water buffaloes and people had some drinkable water. And it was just something that people today have no clue what it's like to live through. So something you wouldn't think would happen in our little town. But everybody worked together. Today we have the National Incident Management System. There is a tremendous amount of news put out, a tremendous amount of warnings. You know, every phone gets warnings today. As Bob said, we didn't have a cell phone. We didn't know what a cell phone was, you know, and there was very little way to communicate with people. There was very little way for them the regional dispatch center was just flooded with 911 calls. And they tried to tell us where we needed to go. But once the water started to get high and the telephone poles, everything came down, just unbelievable. So, but the work together, that's the one thing about emergency services. When push gets to shove, we all work together. The PD, the fire department, the ambulance, emergency management, which was just in its infancy. It had been called civil defense before that. You know, it wasn't even a lot of emergency management stuff like it is today. But Charlie O'Donnell came through with sandbags. God, we were filling sandbags at the town garage like it was crazy, getting them to put around people's houses. We had basements collapsing just from the water pressure. So, but everybody pitched in, everybody helped. No matter what went on, everybody added a little bit of something to make it all work. So, yeah, I think that's about it.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul and Bob and Bill, not just as being part of the panel, but also for your heroic efforts that night. Certainly, it was an incredible moment in the town of Essex's history. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go into gallery mode. And I'm wondering if we have questions from the group. If there are questions for our panel, if you can unmute. Let's see, I'm going to scan down the chat really quick. I don't think we do. Is there anyone who has a question out there? Okay, well, not hearing any, I'd like to, if we can do our applause for our three speakers. I'd like to thank them very much for their efforts that night and for being part of the panel. We are going to have a second recovery, and that's in 2 weeks on March 27th, Sunday, March 27th at 3 p.m. That's a separate link. You can go to our website at essexhistory.org and search for that link. We appreciate that. If anyone wants to stay on with, I know there was a comment in the chat about identifying photos, so I'm happy to, someone wants to listen to some of the, listen to me identify the photos, if that's something that you're interested in. So thank you very much, Bob and Bill and Paul, and we look forward to seeing many of you in 2 weeks of Ivoryton Library and Essex Land Trust. Essex Historical Society thanks you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.